here to talk about digital therapeutics. You may have heard the term. I'd like to have a bit of a discussion around what they are and how you make them, how you build them, and the considerations both on understanding the product implications, how you create value from them, how do you balance a good user experience with the need for clinical outcomes, and a bit on the regulatory complexities, which kind of weaves throughout all those themes. And of course, we'll save some time for questions at the end, and I hope this is valuable for you. So if we think about medicine, digital is really driving a new era of personalization. We go from this notion of treating the symptoms to treating the underlying disease to treating the root cause of that, and now we're thinking about treating the patient more holistically. The advantage in digital is that we can capture a lot more information about that patient. We can be far more adaptive in terms of how we act upon that information, and this creates a lot of new opportunities that go well beyond just basic biology. So what we're talking about is moving from a world of pharmaceuticals or drugs to digital therapy, and you may have seen there were some articles a year or two ago saying, the doctor saying, take this app and call me in the morning. Digital therapeutics, in fact, are prescribed. They are validated platforms, and they are approved to do this because they drive clinical outcomes similar to pharmaceuticals. But how does this work? When we think about what it means to get to a clinical outcome, we can understand that a patient exhibits a certain behavior. We might apply some sort of intervention to influence that behavior. That intervention is mediated through technology, and that package together of behavioral intervention through technology is the digital therapeutic. Now, of course, we're tracking through the data captured along the way in order to influence some sort of clinical outcome, and it has to loop back to that clinical outcome. The advantage, of course, is that you can see this could be an iterative process. As we capture more data that drives the outcomes, we could influence the behavior differently through these technology interventions. And really, that's where there's a lot of power around the personalization and potential to continue to improve these digital therapeutics over time. But let's define digital therapeutics specifically. People are very, broadly aware of the notion of digital health, which is very loosely defined. I can tell you that in our work, almost getting to this definition of digital health can be a challenging starting point. Is anything that has some sort of digital interface, does anything qualify as being a digital health product, or are we talking about solutions that may only be patient related? So are these administrative tools for physicians, or are we only talking about apps, for instance, that are more consumer oriented? I personally take a very broad view on what digital health means, in that it is any software that supports the broader health infrastructure. And with this broader definition, I think of digital therapeutics as a smaller subset within it, and very much aligned to the definition shared by the Digital Therapeutics Alliance, which is that digital therapeutics deliver evidence-based therapeutic interventions to patients that are driven by high-quality software programs to prevent, manage, or treat a broad spectrum of physical, mental, and behavioral conditions. And I want to point you to evidence-based therapeutic interventions. There has to be some sort of clinical data supporting the value of this product for a patient in regards to their health, disease, or conditions. And what that means is that it offers the opportunity for regulatory agencies to get involved. And I prefer to go a step further on digital therapeutics and suggest that regulatory agencies must review and clear these digital therapeutic products for use in order for them to qualify as a quote-unquote digital therapeutic. As a category, digital therapeutics are blowing up. We've seen about $800 million of investment in 2019, large valuations around some of the well-known names like Achilles and Pear. A lot of deals happening in the space as well. with bigger companies. We've seen some players that have been around for a long time come back. For instance, Amalgam is led by one of the founders of WellDoc, which is arguably the first digital therapeutic, in that it was the first software cleared for this type of use over a decade ago now. So as a category, they've been around for some time. But let's look at the 2020 standard. People are well aware of, people in the space are well aware of this company, Beyor Therapeutics. They made waves by being the first software-only digital therapeutic cleared through the de novo pathway, and where they had specific claims on improving clinical outcomes. The difference there being it wasn't just necessarily a piece of software that was prescribed, as was previously done, but they had clinical claims in their submission to the FDA. Beyor Therapeutics is now a brand name within the digital therapeutics realm. They were one of the first 9 companies that took part in FDA's pre-certification pilot program. And they actually put that program to its paces with a recent release of their Somryst platform for chronic insomnia. As of now, they've got 4 products in the market. First is Reset for substance use disorder, which is shown on the right. So what is it? This is an app. It uses cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a standard therapeutic approach that is often done more in person, but reimagines that through a software interface. And they executed through this de novo clearance. They executed a 12-week trial with over 500 subjects or patients involved, and they randomized it against the standard of care. So a very robust platform, clinically validated. They were able to use a similar platform in opioid use disorder, and most excitingly, they're actually in the schizophrenia space as of a couple of weeks ago due to relaxing regulatory standards through the pandemic. And I'll talk a bit more about that later. But when you look at the pipeline, it's really amazing how many different diseases that Beyor Therapeutics is going after across the spectrum of opportunities, places where you wouldn't necessarily think that a behavioral intervention could offer a lot of upside. Multiple sclerosis, some in GI, voice, oncology of all things. So there is really, I think when you look at this pipeline, you look at the products on the market, and this is just one company, we see a lot of opportunity in this space. And that's really shown by the number of companies in the space. This slide shows just a handful of those. I think I'm personally on my LinkedIn feed, see a new digital therapeutics company that someone has joined that I haven't heard about, at least every week. It's a very exciting category for those that are interested in digital health broadly and are passionate about driving towards clinical outcomes. So what does it take to stand up a digital therapeutic? We like to think of 3 critical parts. One, of course, is the product. So this is software. There's often hardware involved too, but at its core, there's a software element. So we have to think about, what that product is. But product alone doesn't get you there. And often when we see development teams that focus too much on the technology, they leave a lot on the table in the other areas. First, of course, is clinical strategy. This has to drive to an outcome. So the product development needs to be aligned to the clinical development, and that can be quite complex. And I'll talk a bit about those complexities in a few minutes. And then finally is the commercial strategy or value creation. I think there's quite a bit of uncertainty right now around value creation in digital therapeutics. And we like to think of a 4-part framework to value creation that I will share with you. Each of these parts are critical, and all of them need to happen. And I would argue all of them need to happen simultaneously. These are not sequential streams where you do one, then the next. They are not parallel streams that run independently. Each of them interfaces with the other, and it's important that they do in order to create a successful digital therapeutic. So first, let me start with product. At Digital Ventures, we are passionate about strategic design or human-centered design. We very much believe that it's important to understand a user within their own world. We do a lot of ethnographic research to look at people and how they interact within their world and around others. So this is really where to start. The power of human-centered design is that you can create a more valuable product experience for that individual. It's really critical through this process that users are involved early on. I think one of the failing points that we often see are more waterfall-based approaches to design and development within this category of digital therapeutics. A lot of companies feel that they can create a single spec document and hand it over, and that a development team could code that, and it's a fixed solution. We believe in taking the approach of working with users early on, using prototypes as much as possible, and iterating on them as quickly as possible, collaborating across multiple disciplines as well. Because one of the key aspects when we think about the digital therapeutic is that the patient is only one stakeholder in the mix. Ultimately, taking care of patients involves clinicians as well. And many digital therapeutics require interfaces on both sides. That means that the experience has to be optimized not just for the patient, but also for the clinician. And for those that may be aware, the clinicians are reaching their breaking point when it comes to software use at this point. They spend over half their day in and out of electronic medical records, and adding another interface for them, usually the answer is no. We need to find opportunities to help them do their work better, to help them take care of their patients better. So when we think about strategic design, it really requires involving all stakeholders, patients and clinicians, as we're standing these up. Separately, when we think about the patient side of it, often the intervention itself is insufficient to create a valuable user experience. We may need personalized content to draw people back. We may need connectivity more broadly, certainly to that clinical care team, but possibly social connectivity as well. And additionally, we're seeing a lot of opportunities for integration with other pieces of hardware or other data systems that can really help personalize these experiences more and more. Now, when you put that all together, these digital therapeutics can actually start to become pretty complex from an architecture perspective. You're looking at, certainly the clinician-facing systems. There's a patient-facing system. There's obviously an admin-facing system. There's a lot of users that are accessing this. The features tend to expand quite a bit beyond just that simple intervention tool in order to create the stickiness that optimizes user experience. And optimizing user experience is critical, because if people aren't using this, then their behaviors will not change, and we won't see any clinical outcomes. Now, I want to really double down on physicians for a minute. We always think about the patients and the patients using these platforms, but for the most part, patients listen to their doctors. Patients, when they're sick, they want to know what their doctor advises them to do. So physician support is really critical to the success of these digital therapeutics when it comes to getting them into the hands of patients. Now, we've seen survey data has shown that patients have a growing interest in using digital therapeutics, and the physicians are actually the ones kind of driving recognition of these programs. But a lot of them also said they need a doctor recommendation to use it, and this is really where the prescription comes in. So I like to think about physicians as really one of the core channels when we're creating value, and it very much links to why you would run a clinical trial at all. we like to think about value creation for digital therapeutics across 4 different parts. First is the data. The data, there's a lot of excitement around data in healthcare. Real world evidence is a growing space of looking at how patients are interacting after they've had a therapeutic intervention, how they interact with their world, the types of outcomes they're seeing, and feeding that data back into R&D in order to improve therapies over time. Now that data itself, there is still a little uncertainty in terms of exactly which pieces of data are valuable and how they will be applied, but there is a major drive to capture more data, consolidate it, and feed it back into the system. Secondly is direct monetization. As with other therapeutics, you can charge for them. You can charge patients directly. There are consumer models. In this case, it's more of sort of a cash pay, you know, the buying an app, so to speak. There are employer programs. We're seeing this as a reasonably successful model where digital therapeutics companies can have partnerships with large employers to offer these services to their employee base. This can also be done through payers. I know an adjacent example, you know, we, for instance, have access to Headspace and that app, and very similar model. And thirdly is payer reimbursement. Now, payer reimbursement to date, we're only scratching the surface. And a lot of it is due to the uncertainty around the category as a whole. There are some examples of payers providing reimbursement. They're more often linked to employer programs than just standalone. Third is capability building. A lot of companies that are building digital therapeutics are not actually these, you know, small startups. And those, in fact, are a lot of the companies that we work with. They are looking to create capabilities within digital. And for them, creating something that's really on the leading edge is a way to build those internal capabilities. And finally, pull through drug revenue. Now, what's really interesting about digital therapeutics is, although they are, from an FDA point of view, classified as a medical device, it's the pharma industry that's really driving a lot of the push for this. It's the pharma industry that is doing the partnerships with the startups, and the pharma industry that is building new digital therapeutics. Many times their interest is in creating more of a companion app, or something that works together with other drugs that they are either creating or selling. The notion would be, if I've got a drug and you use this app, you know, perhaps you'll get a increased outcome by using the app associated with the drug. Now, of course, the product complexity grows once you start associating what would be standalone software alongside a drug. But there is also additional value creation available on the table by selling more. Now, I mentioned the reimbursement landscape. I think on the monetization side, this is an important piece to highlight. We're really just in the early stages here. There are formularies that have been created. There are models in place for payment adjudication. And I did mention these unique payment models. Blue Cross Blue Shield, for instance, of Minnesota, is working with Omada to deliver this to their employer customers. But the key is really clinical outcomes. A lot of times what we're seeing on the payer side is that they are looking for more or different clinical data than that's being provided to the FDA. They want to see value. And I think long-term, we imagine that this could go towards more of a value-based care model from where it is today. As you start to put all these pieces together, it's clear that the development path could be quite different from a standard pharma or medtech development path. If I think about what drug development usually is, there's some portion of research where you identify a molecule. There's early development to do clinical trials and validate that it's safe and that it shows, you know, early signs of efficacy. There's, you know, 1 or 2 registration trials, so big clinical trials and those are associated with the submission to the FDA. And then there's a launch. Now, this process is very sequential in nature, and clinical trials are done in a blinded way, so that as they run, you're not necessarily seeing the data, and you look at the outcomes when complete. And that's why drugs fail at a pretty high rate. But when we think about developing in digital, and we think about the importance of this notion of strategic design, we need to put this in the hands of users very early, and we need to iterate on that feedback. So the same sort of processes just can't apply in the same way. The approaches that we like to use at Digital Ventures as we are building these platforms with our partners are more of a early incubation to get to a usable product. You could think of this as an MVP per se. There are soft launches with it that are more testing oriented. Think of these as almost like small usability focused clinical trials. They may or may not qualify under an IRB or institutional review board, depending on how we are working with a given set of investigators. But it's really important that we put these in the hands of patients to understand that usability, to understand the physician usability, and to show that we're getting early signs of some sort of clinical outcomes. Of course, once we start to feel good about that solution, we'll move into a more formal clinical trial process that will drive towards clinical outcomes, and then we launch. But again, you'll see we keep iterating after launch. These products cannot be static. As with any digital product, we'll continually be gathering data from our user base and creating opportunities to improve the products over time. Now, this is a different model versus what the FDA is used to, where the FDA is used to approving a molecule or drug, and the drug stays the same over time. If you want to change it, you need to submit again and potentially change the label or make an adaptation to the drug. In digital, this process needs to be more continual and needs to be more responsive. We've been very encouraged to see the FDA making big strides here over the last decade. And I'd like to highlight two specifics, the last two. So first, in 2019, they began the pre-cert program, where there was an acknowledgement that they didn't necessarily need to approve the product distinct from the capabilities of a company. So companies, as I mentioned earlier, 9 companies qualified under this pre-cert program, where their processes and capabilities were evaluated to qualify. Therapeutics was the first one to push a product through this pre-cert program, and I'm sure there were a lot of learnings along the way for those on the FDA side as well, and we're excited to see a lot more. And just recently, on April 14th, they released additional guidance during this period of COVID-19, a waiver for digital therapeutics treating psychiatric disorders. This means that they require no 510K, which is the submission, the medical device submission that most digital therapeutics fall under, no 510K to go to market. For those companies that were ready, they were able to move on it quite quickly. And I'll be very curious to see how this evolves over time. Now, of course, just because we're using a different development process doesn't mean that all the standards don't apply. You still have to do all the basics. There's engagement with the FDA early through a pre-submission process. You need to file an IDE. There's human factors testing, which often involves the lab tests of the software and hardware. You have to do this under quality management systems, which involve a lot of controls and documentation. And of course, you do need to run a clinical trial, and you have to do the filings. So none of this changes, and there is a high bar to get all of these regulatory requirements done. But in many ways, this can be a competitive differentiator for those that do a good job and can do it very efficiently. Now, I did mention the changing FDA standards, and I am particularly excited about these. So the first one to jump on this was Achille, And they, within days, you can see it, it was amazing that within 8 days, they had released a digital therapeutic for children with ADHD. And it really goes to show that some of these companies were ready. They had all those processes in place. They had done enough testing with their user base through these types of similar iterative approaches that they felt comfortable actually pushing their products out into the market in order to commercialize them immediately on the heels of this changing guidance from the FDA. The real question is long term. What will we learn from this? Will the FDA go backward and once we're out of the pandemic, suggest that perhaps there are safety concerns and the standard is too loose? Or will we find that in fact digital therapeutics are quite safe because they are app-based and they drive outcomes and they create more data available that we can continue to work with? I'm hopeful it's the latter, and that this move by the FDA, that we will see even more of these in the category. So we at Digital Ventures are quite involved in digital therapeutics. We are in the process of building many of them with our corporate partners. For this reason, we're launching a platform called DTXL that puts all these pieces together. As you might imagine, there's a lot of complexity, both when you're aligning between product and clinical and commercial, a lot of different capabilities you need to put together. And we've pushed all of these under one roof in order to do this more efficiently within that corporate setting, which is quite different from doing it in the startup environment. The advantage, of course, is it's easier, we move faster, more scalable, and it's de-risked. Working with a partner that has experience doing this. For us, DTXL represents our commitment to this space. We've been investing directly in this, both in terms of technology and people and partnerships. And we believe that digital therapeutics are a category that will only grow from here. And we're looking forward to building many more of them.